She was 7 years old, gap-toothed, and completely fearless. She grabbed his sleeve in the hallway outside apartment 4B, looked straight up at the woman standing in the doorway, the most guarded woman he had ever met, and asked the question neither adult had the courage to even think out loud. The little girl didn't understand what she had just done, but Cole Mercer felt the floor shift beneath him, and Victoria Ashcroft, billionaire, ice queen, survivor of things she never talked about, went absolutely still. Someone watching through a hidden camera recorded every second of it and marked them both for what came next. Before we go any further, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notifications, because this channel is where stories like this one live. Stories about real people, real choices, and the kind of love that doesn't announce itself. It just shows up in a hallway at the wrong moment and refuses to leave. Drop a like if you're already hooked, and tell me in the comments what city or country you're watching from. I read every single one, and I love knowing how far these stories travel. Now, let's go back to the beginning. The elevator in Birchwood Commons had been broken for 11 days. Management had sent 2 repair crews. The first one looked at the control panel, quoted a number that made the building owner choke on his coffee, and left. The second one showed up without the right parts, poked around for 40 minutes, and also left. On the 12th day, Cole Mercer showed up with a toolbox, a flashlight he'd had since his Navy days, and absolutely no patience for problems that other people had already quit on. He wasn't the building's head of anything. His official title was maintenance supervisor, which mostly meant he was the person the tenants called when the heat went out at 2 in the morning or a pipe decided to express itself through someone's bathroom ceiling. He was good at the work, not passionate about it. Nobody was passionate about clearing clogged drains, but good at it in the way that a person gets good at something when they stop caring what anyone thinks about the job and just focus on doing it right. He had the elevator running by noon. Mrs. Petrakis from the 3rd floor saw him closing the panel and started clapping like he'd performed surgery. He told her it wasn't a big deal. She told him he was wrong and pressed a Tupperware container of spanakopita into his hands before he could argue. Cole took the stairs back up to the 4th floor because he always took the stairs. Old habit, you don't stop moving just because the threat is gone. Or at least, that was the logic he used to explain it to himself. The truth was more complicated, but he'd learned a long time ago that not every truth needed examining. His apartment was 4A. The one across the hall, 4B, had been empty for 3 weeks before the woman moved in. He had seen the movers, watched them haul in furniture that cost more than his truck, without understanding why someone who could afford that furniture would rent an apartment in Birchwood Commons. The building wasn't bad. It was clean, quiet, in a decent part of the city. But it wasn't the kind of place you ended up if you had real money. It was the kind of place you ended up if you were trying not to be found. He had introduced himself the way you do with new neighbors, knocked on the door, said his name, explained his role in the building, told her to call the front desk if anything needed attention. She had opened the door about 12 inches. Dark hair pulled back, no makeup, clothes that looked expensive but were trying not to. She said her name was Victoria. She did not offer a last name. She thanked him and closed the door. Cole had stood in the hallway for a half-second longer than necessary, then gone back to 4A. Emma was at the kitchen table doing homework she clearly did not want to be doing. "Who was that?" she asked without looking up. "New neighbor." "What's her name?" "Victoria." "Is she nice?" "Seems like it." Emma finally looked up. She had her mother's eyes. The observation still hit him sometimes, in quiet moments, like a hand on his shoulder from behind. "Does she have kids?" "Didn't ask." "You should have asked." "She probably didn't want me interviewing her, Em." "It's not an interview, it's being friendly." She went back to her homework. "You should be friendlier." Cole opened the spanakopita and said nothing. So, Emma was 7, going on 43. People who met her for the first time usually came away slightly unsettled, in the pleasant way you feel unsettled when a child says something that turns out to be more accurate than anything an adult said all day. She was small for her age, missing one of her front teeth, and had a habit of staring at people with a focus that made them feel like she was reading something written on the inside of their forehead. Her teacher had called Cole in for a conference in October. He'd sat in the small plastic chair across from a woman who taught 2nd grade and looked like she'd seen everything, and she told him that Emma was doing beautifully academically, that she was kind and well-liked, and that the only thing was She sometimes said things that caught the class off guard. Cole asked for an example. The teacher described a show-and-tell situation where Emma had told her classmates that her dad used to have a job where he helped people by being very quiet and very fast in the dark, and that he didn't do that anymore because something sad happened and now he fixed things instead, which was still helping people but in a different way, and also you didn't get hurt as much. Cole had driven home from that conference in complete silence. He didn't know how to explain to a 7-year-old that some things didn't need explaining, that some things you just carried, that the transition from what he had been to what he was now had not been a decision so much as a necessity, something that happened to him while he was busy grieving his wife and figuring out how to make a ponytail. Lauren had been gone 4 years. Aneurysm. No warning. The kind of thing that didn't give you time to brace for impact, because that was the whole point. There was no impact. She was there, and then she wasn't, and the shape of the hole she left was so specific and so total that for a long time Cole had moved through his days like a man reading from a script he hadn't written. He'd separated from the Navy 8 months after she died. The timing made people think those things were connected, but they weren't exactly. He had already been planning to get out. He and Lauren had already been talking about what that looked like. The apartment. A city where Emma could grow up with a father who came home every night. The plan just continued without one of its architects. He took the maintenance job because a former teammate knew the building owner and the schedule was reliable, and it let him walk Emma to school and pick her up without complicated arrangements. It was not a glamorous explanation. It was the real one. He had learned to be fine with that. The first actual conversation he had with Victoria happened because of a radiator. 2 weeks into her tenancy, at 9:30 on a Tuesday night, Cole's phone buzzed with a text from the building's after-hours line. Tenant in 4B reporting a knocking sound from the heating unit, intermittent, loud enough to be disruptive. He knocked on her door with his toolbox and found her standing in the entryway in a dark sweater, arms crossed, looking like she hadn't slept well in days. The apartment was immaculate. He noticed that immediately, the kind of immaculate that wasn't about tidiness so much as the total absence of personal objects. No photographs, no mess of books or chargers or the small accumulated debris of a real life. Just furniture, clean surfaces, and a laptop open on the kitchen counter with about 15 browser tabs visible. "It's the third pipe from the left," she said, pointing toward the radiator. "It sounds like someone tapping with a coin. Air pocket, probably. Takes a few weeks for the system to settle when a unit's been empty. Can you fix it tonight?" "Should be able to." He worked while she stood in the kitchen, not watching him exactly, more like being in the same room while being somewhere else entirely. He recognized the posture. He'd worn it himself. "You don't have to stay up," he said. "I'm not staying up for you. I don't sleep much." "Okay." He bled the valve, listened, waited. The knocking stopped. "That's it?" she said. "That's it." She looked at the radiator like she wasn't sure she believed it. "How long have you worked here?" 3 years. "Before this?" He glanced over. She had the look of someone who asked questions as a reflex, maybe professionally. "Different field," he said. "What kind of different?" "The kind I don't really talk about." Something shifted in her expression. Not offense, more like recognition. Like she understood perfectly what it meant to have a category of your life that stayed behind a closed door. "Fair enough," she said. He packed his toolbox. At the door he paused. "Building's quiet mostly. Only real noise issue is the Hallorans on 2. They argue every Sunday morning, but it's usually done by 10. And Mrs. Petrakis bakes on Thursday afternoons, and the whole floor smells like butter for about 3 hours. Victoria stared at him. "Just so you know what you're dealing with," he said. The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but something adjacent to one. "Thanks." He went back to 4A. Emma was asleep. He stood in the kitchen for a while eating crackers and not thinking about very much. The Thursday dinner happened entirely by accident. Emma had been coming home from school through the side entrance, which took her past the 4th-floor hallway, and she had apparently been stopping to talk to Victoria for approximately a week and a half before Cole found out about it. He found out about it because he came home on a Thursday to find his daughter sitting cross-legged on the hallway floor outside 4B, eating an apple and explaining the plot of a book she'd read at school to someone on the other side of a half-open door. Cole stood at the end of the hallway and watched for a moment. And the girl doesn't know the dragon is actually her friend, Emma was saying, because the dragon is scared too. That's the whole thing. They're both scared of each other for no reason. From behind the door. That does seem like a waste of time. That's what I said. My teacher said it's called a misunderstanding. I said it's called being silly. Cole walked forward. Emma spotted him and waved like he was late to a meeting she'd already started without him. Victoria opened the door a little wider when she heard him approach. She was in the same dark sweater. He was starting to think she owned several identical ones. She knocked, Victoria said, before he could speak. I should have told her to go inside. I wasn't bothering her, Emma said firmly. I was keeping her company. There's a difference. Cole looked at his daughter. You knock on neighbors' doors? Only this one. Emma stood up, dusting off her jeans. She seemed lonely. The silence that followed was the specific kind of silence that happens when a child says something that lands exactly right, and all the adults in the room have nowhere to go with it. Victoria's face did something complicated. Em, Cole said, go get started on your homework. I already did it. Then go. I made soup, Victoria said. They both looked at her. She looked faintly alarmed by her own words. I made too much. It was something to do. It's just minestrone. She paused. You don't have to. We'd love to, Emma said. Cole opened his mouth. We'd love to, Emma repeated with great finality. The soup was good. Better than good. Victoria ate standing at the counter for the first 10 minutes, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to sit at her own table with other people in the room. Emma climbed into a chair and started talking about a kid at school named Diego, who had eaten a piece of paper on a dare and was now something of a legend, and somehow the conversation spilled from there into other things. The broken elevator, how Cole had fixed it, what exactly a Navy SEAL was, which Emma explained with confidence, and several factual inaccuracies that Cole did not correct because they were at least entertaining. Victoria listened to Emma with an expression Cole couldn't quite categorize. It wasn't the polite attention of someone enduring a child's monologue. It was something closer to quiet hunger, like she was absorbing something she hadn't realized she'd been missing. She refilled Emma's water glass without being asked. After dinner, Cole washed the dishes despite Victoria's protests, because she had cooked, and it seemed like the right distribution of labor. Emma dried, standing on a step stool, handing him plates she had wiped approximately clean. Victoria leaned against the counter and watched them with her arms loose at her sides, not crossed for once. And there was a moment, just a moment, where the kitchen felt full of something that wasn't food and wasn't conversation. Cole didn't let himself name it. On the way out, Emma hugged Victoria around the waist, quick and decisive, the way she did everything. Victoria's hands came up slowly, like she was remembering how the gesture worked. She patted Emma's back twice, carefully. He should have noticed the car earlier. It was the same dark SUV, parked across from the building's main entrance 3 days in a row. Different spots each time, angled to maintain sightlines. He clocked it on Tuesday morning when he was taking out recycling and filed it in the back of his mind without consciously deciding to. On Friday evening, he saw it again. Engine off. One person visible in the front seat, windows tinted just past legal. Cole stood on the building steps for a moment, hands in his jacket pockets, not looking directly at the vehicle. He went back inside and climbed the stairs and did not say anything to anyone. But something old and quiet had woken up in his chest. Something that had no name in civilian life, but that he had learned to respect completely, because the 2 or 3 times in his career he had ignored it, he had come close to not coming home. The break-in happened on a Wednesday. Victoria called down to the front desk at 7 in the evening, her voice flat and controlled in a way that Cole recognized as the voice of someone working hard not to sound scared. He came up within 4 minutes. The lock on her door had been bypassed cleanly, not kicked, not forced, which was the part that made his jaw tighten. Forced entry meant desperation. Clean bypass meant training. Someone who knew what they were doing had walked into this apartment and wanted it to look like they hadn't been there. They hadn't taken anything obvious. Jewelry was untouched, laptop still on the counter, but the laptop had been moved. Cole saw it before she pointed it out. Repositioned about 2 inches from where a person who used it every day would leave it. Almost identical, but not quite. Did you call the police? He asked. Yes, they came, filed a report, said it was probably a curiosity break-in, that nothing was taken. She said it evenly, like she was reciting something she'd already decided not to believe. But you don't think so? She looked at him. Her eyes were dark and very steady. No, she said. I don't think so. He looked around the apartment again. At the windows? At the vents? At the smoke detector above the kitchen counter that was positioned 6 inches to the left of where the bracket was designed for. He stood still for a moment. I need to check something, he said. Don't touch that. He pointed at the smoke detector. He went down to his apartment and came back with a different kind of tool than a maintenance man needed. Victoria watched him sweep the detector without asking what he was doing, which told him she already understood the possibility. The device was small, commercially available if you knew where to look. Wireless. Broadcasting. Cole looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at Victoria. She was standing with her arms wrapped around herself, not out of coldness, the heat was fine, but in the way a person holds themselves together when things start confirming what they were afraid of. She was scared. She was covering it with a composure that was impressive and also, he thought, probably very lonely to maintain. How long has someone been after you? He asked. She was quiet. I'm not going to tell anyone, Tom, he said. I'm your neighbor. I found a camera in your apartment. You can tell me it's none of my business, and that's fair, but I'm asking. Victoria looked at the device in his hand for a long moment. Since I voted against the merger, she said finally, 8 months ago, my partners, my former partners, lost $4 billion in leverage when I blocked it. They've been trying to recoup that position. She said it like she was talking about the weather, like she had rehearsed being calm about it so many times it had become the only register available to her. I thought coming here somewhere low profile would buy me some time before the shareholders' meeting. When's the meeting? 6 weeks? Cole set the device on the counter. I'm going to replace your lock tonight, front and the window latches. He paused. I want to set up something on the exterior too, unofficial. You'll be able to see the hallway from inside. She stared at him. You know how to do that. It's not complicated. Cole. Her voice was different, not flat anymore. Who are you? He picked up his toolbox. Right now, he said, I'm the guy fixing your locks. He worked for 2 hours. She sat at the kitchen counter and didn't pretend to use her laptop, just watched him work, and at some point she made coffee without asking if he wanted any, and set a cup on the floor beside his toolbox, which was the kind of thoughtful thing people do when they're not thinking about being thoughtful. Emma was asleep by the time he got back to 4A. He sat on the edge of his bed for a while in the dark. Then he pulled a phone out of his desk drawer, not the one he used every day, and sent a message to a contact listed only as Ruiz. Need eyes on a situation. Nothing official. Let me know if you're available. The reply came in 4 minutes. Always. What are we looking at? Cole looked at the wall between his apartment and 4B. He typed, not sure yet, but someone's already moved first. The next morning, Emma was awake before him, which was not unusual, and was eating cereal at the kitchen table, which was. She usually had to be coaxed out of bed with a sequence of increasingly specific reasons why being awake was better than being asleep. He asked her what was going on. She looked up from her bowl with the expression she made when she'd already worked something out and was waiting for him to catch up. Is Miss Victoria going to be okay? She asked. Why would you ask that? Because she looks like you did, Emma said simply. After Mom. Like she's holding something really heavy and trying to make it look like she isn't. Cole sat down across from her. Outside, the city was just getting started. Somewhere below them, a truck was backing up, the beeping small and distant. The radiator in the corner ticked once, then went quiet. I don't know yet, he said. Emma nodded like this was an acceptable answer. She went back to her cereal. Dad? Yeah. You should help her. He looked at his daughter, the gap in her teeth, the absolute certainty in her face, and the eyes that had come from somewhere he still missed every single day. I know, he said. And that was the thing. He did know. He'd known it since the smoke detector. He just wasn't sure yet what helping was going to cost him. Ruiz showed up 2 days later in a gray Honda that had seen better years, parked in the visitor lot like he belonged there, which was the whole point. Marcus Ruiz had been Cole's teammate for 6 years across 3 deployments, and he had the particular talent of being completely unremarkable in any environment, medium height, medium build, the kind of face that people looked at and immediately forgot. He had once walked through a checkpoint in a country Cole couldn't name in polite company by smiling at the guard and holding a clipboard, and nobody had questioned him for a second. Cole met him in the parking garage, away from the building's exterior cameras. "Tell me what you have," Ruiz said, skipping the greeting because they were past the age of greetings. Cole laid it out. The SUV, the clean bypass on the door, the device and the smoke detector. The shareholders' meeting 6 weeks out. Victoria's former partners and $4 billion in leverage. Ruiz listened without interrupting. When Cole finished, he was quiet for a moment in the way that meant he was sorting information, not processing it. He'd already processed it while Cole was still talking. "You pull anything on the partners?" "I know the company, Ashcroft Vallon Technologies. Her former co-founder is a man named Derek Vallon. He pushed the merger. She killed it. The target company was a defense subcontractor with about $600 million in government contracts that Vallon wanted folded into their portfolio." "Why'd she block it?" "Publicly? Due diligence concerns. The subcontractor had 3 pending federal audits." "And privately?" Cole looked at him. "She hasn't told me privately. She doesn't trust me that far yet." Ruiz nodded. "She know you called me?" "No." "You gonna tell her?" Cole thought about that for a second. "When I need to." Ruiz pulled a folded paper from his jacket, an actual paper, which was a Ruiz thing. He didn't like phones for anything sensitive, and handed it over. "The SUV is registered to a logistics company out of Reston, Virginia, Shell. The real owner traces back through 2 more shells to a private security firm called Crossline Consulting. They do contract work, mostly overseas, occasionally domestic, when the client is paying enough to make the liability worth it." Cole looked at the paper. "Mercenaries. Expensive ones. Not the kind you hire to scare someone, the kind you hire when you have a specific outcome in mind and a deadline." The parking garage was cold. Cole folded the paper and put it in his jacket pocket. "This is above a break-in," Ruiz said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah." "So what are you doing, Cole?" "Right now I'm doing what I can from where I am." Ruiz looked at him with the expression he used when he thought someone was giving him the diplomatic answer instead of the honest one. "She a friend?" "She's a neighbor." "Right." Ruiz picked up his clipboard. He actually carried a clipboard, out of habit or comedy, Cole was never sure, and tucked it under his arm. "I'll sit on the building for a few days. Eyes only. You want me to reach out to any of the old network?" "Not yet. Keep it quiet. I don't want to escalate something that might still resolve." Ruiz made a sound that communicated considerable skepticism without requiring words. He walked back to the gray Honda, got in, and drove out of the parking garage like a man returning library books. Cole stood in the cold for a moment. Then he went back upstairs to fix a leaking faucet in apartment 2C, because the building didn't stop having problems just because he did. The Thursday dinner became a Friday dinner, and then somehow both. It hadn't been planned. It was more that Emma had a gravitational field when it came to things she'd decided were good ideas, and she had decided that dinner across the hall was a good idea, with the kind of certainty she usually reserved for opinions about cartoons and the correct way to eat a sandwich. She knocked on Victoria's door on Friday afternoon with a container of leftover pasta from Wednesday, and an expression that made clear she was not leaving until the container had been accepted. Victoria accepted it. And then, because she apparently had no defense against a 7-year-old with a clear sense of mission, she heated it up and invited Emma to stay and eat, and called Cole to let him know where his daughter was. And Cole came over and the 3 of them ate pasta at the kitchen table, and the whole thing had the feeling of something that had been happening for years, even though it had been happening for about 2 weeks. He noticed things about her, the way you notice things about someone when you're paying the kind of attention you're trying not to pay. She drank her coffee without sugar, but with an amount of cream that functionally made it a different beverage. She read articles on her laptop in a way that suggested she was looking for specific information, not just scrolling, rapid, deliberate, with occasional pauses where she would stare at something and then close the tab. She had a habit of pushing her hair behind her left ear when she was concentrating, and she was always concentrating. She was funny, in a dry way that snuck up on you. Emma had said something about a kid at school who had tried to argue with their teacher about the rules of fractions. And Victoria had said, without looking up from her coffee, "He'll either become a mathematician or a lawyer. Either way, everyone's going to find him exhausting." And Cole had laughed before he could decide whether to. Victoria had looked slightly surprised, like she wasn't sure what to do with being laughed at in a way that felt good. He understood that. She told him more about Valen on a Thursday evening when Emma had fallen asleep on Victoria's couch. She did this occasionally, just powered down mid-conversation like a device with no warning, and Cole had learned to keep a blanket in his jacket for exactly this eventuality. He covered Emma up and came back to the kitchen, and Victoria was already refilling both their mugs with coffee that was slightly too strong, the way she always made it. Valen and I started the company together 12 years ago, she said. She said it to her mug, not to Cole, like she was telling the story to the coffee. He had the product vision. I had the capital structure and the investor relationships. It worked because we didn't overlap. We each stayed in our lane. What changed? He ran out of lane. She wrapped both hands around the mug. The merger was his idea. He'd been building a side relationship with the subcontractors board for about 2 years before he brought it to me. By the time I saw the proposal, he'd already committed us informally. He expected a rubber stamp. And you actually looked at it. I always actually look. For the first time, there was an edge in her voice. Not at him, but at the memory. The audits were the visible problem. The real problem was that 2 of the subcontractors' board members had direct financial relationships with a procurement official at the Department of Defense. The deal would have put us in the middle of something that could have taken down the entire company, not just the division. Did you tell him that? I told the full board. With documentation. She paused. Valen told the board I was being obstructionist for personal reasons, that I was trying to undermine his leadership. Were you? She looked at him. No. I was trying to keep the company from becoming a defendant in a federal investigation. She put the mug down. But you can't prove a negative, so... He forced a vote. I won the vote. He lost a board seat. And $4 billion in projected deal value evaporated. And then he hired people to follow you. I don't know that for certain. Cole looked at her steadily. She exhaled. I don't know it for certain, she repeated, softer. But I know it's him, the timing, the specificity. The break-in happened 2 weeks after I filed for the special shareholders meeting to restructure the board. If I get a majority of shareholders behind me, he's out entirely. He has everything to lose and 6 weeks to prevent it. And your security team? Something changed in her face. I had a security team, she said. Had. 3 people. Contracts, not employees. 2 weeks ago, they terminated their agreements simultaneously. Same day, same hour. Actually. She said it quietly. Valen has relationships I don't have visibility into. He's been working this for a while. Cole was quiet for a moment. Outside, a car passed on the street below, headlights sweeping across the ceiling. Victoria. I know what you're going to say. You're exposed. I know. You can't stay here without... I know, Cole. Not sharp, just tired. The tiredness of someone who had been thinking about this every hour for weeks and had no good solutions. Just a set of options that were all worse than the situation she'd started with. I can't leave town. If I leave before the shareholders' meeting, it looks like I'm conceding. It gives Valen grounds to challenge my seat. I have to stay, and I have to keep functioning, and I have to do it without a security detail, because apparently that's where I am right now. She was holding this mug with both hands, and her knuckles were slightly white. Cole looked at Emma on the couch, small and completely trusting under the blanket. Then you have me, he said, until you have something better. Victoria turned to look at him. I'm not your security team, he said. I'm telling you what I can do from where I am. I know this building. I know every entrance, every camera angle, every person who doesn't belong, and I know what cross-line consulting is and what it means that they're the ones Valen used. The way she looked at him then was different from any way she'd looked at him before, like a window had opened somewhere. You know the company by name, she said slowly. A contact identified the SUV. What kind of contact? Old colleague. She was putting it together. He could see it happening. The maintenance supervisor who never used the elevator, who had swept her apartment for surveillance equipment with practiced efficiency, who had replaced her locks with his own hardware in a way that had nothing to do with maintenance training. Cole, she said, who did you used to be? He picked up his coffee. Someone who's been trying to be something different for about 4 years, he said, with mixed results apparently. She didn't push. Which was one of the things he was learning about her. She had a sense of when a door was closed, and she didn't stand outside knocking. She just noted the location and waited. He respected that more than he could have explained. The weekend happened without anyone planning it. Emma had a school friend's birthday party on Saturday that ran until 3. And when Cole picked her up, she was windburned and sugar-crashed and asleep in the back seat before they reached the first stoplight. He carried her upstairs and put her to bed, and stood in the kitchen not particularly hungry, looking at the wall that divided his apartment from 4B. He knocked on Victoria's door at 4. She opened it looking like she'd been working, which she had. Laptop open, papers spread across the kitchen table, the focused kind of disorder that was actually organized. She looked at him for a moment. "I was going to get coffee from the place on Harmon," he said. "You want to come?" She looked at the laptop, then at him, then at the laptop again, the way a person looks at work they know they should keep doing. "Give me 2 minutes," she said. The coffee shop on Harmon was small and warm and had the slightly chaotic atmosphere of a place run by someone who cared more about the coffee than the furniture arrangement, which Cole appreciated. They got a table by the window because Victoria gravitated toward windows. He'd noticed that, not for the view but for the sight lines, the awareness of who was coming and going. He did the same thing. They sat on the same side of the table without discussing it, facing the room, which probably looked strange to anyone watching but felt completely natural. She had a macchiato. He had black coffee. She stole 2 of his fries when they arrived at the table, without acknowledging that she was doing it. "You always take food without asking?" he said. "You weren't eating them." "I hadn't started yet." "You were looking at the window." "I was going to eat them." She ate a third one, with great calm. "You're not going to run out." He looked at her. "Do you do this with everyone?" "Only people I'm comfortable with," she said. And then she seemed to catch herself. Something flickered across her face, brief and unguarded, like the words had come out slightly ahead of her intention. Cole didn't make a thing of it. They talked about Emma for a while, the way they did easily now, the way people talked about a mutual friend whose company they both loved. Emma's book obsession. Emma's opinions about lunch, which were extensive and detailed and frequently wrong by any objective nutrition standard, but delivered with such confidence that they were hard to argue with. Emma's current theory that the building's basement was definitely haunted, but probably friendly haunted, like the ghost just wants to be noticed. Victoria laughed at that one, an actual laugh, not the polite kind, and Cole sat with the sound of it for a second. "She's going to be something," Victoria said. "She already is something. I mean, when she's older, she's going to be someone people have a hard time keeping up with." "I know." He said it with the particular mix of pride and preemptive exhaustion that was basically the defining emotional state of parenting. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Outside, someone walked past the window with a dog that was trying to go in 4 directions simultaneously. "Does she remember her mother?" Victoria asked. Not carefully, not walking on eggshells, just asking, the way she asked things, with the directness she usually kept pointed at business decisions. "Some. She was 3 when Lauren died. She has impressions more than memories, feelings that attach to objects or sounds." Cole turned his cup. "She says she remembers her mom's voice. I don't know if that's a real memory or if she built it from the videos." "Does it matter?" He thought about it. "No," he said. "Not really. It's hers either way." Victoria was looking at the table. "My mother died when I was 9. I used to—" She stopped, started again. "I used to not be sure what I actually remembered versus what I'd been told. For a long time it bothered me, like I was lying about my own grief. And now? Now I think grief doesn't need a verified source. It just needs to be real to you." Cole looked at her. She was still looking at the table, at nothing in particular, and she had the expression of someone who had just said something more honest than they intended. "That's a good way to think about it," he said. She looked up. The unguarded thing was back for a second, the thing that showed up when she wasn't managing herself carefully, and then she blinked and it was gone. "You want the rest of your fries?" she said. "Yes," he said. "I would like the rest of my fries." She pushed the plate back across the table. He ate the remaining ones. She drank her macchiato and watched the street, and the afternoon got longer, and neither of them moved to leave. The threat escalated on a Tuesday. Cole was replacing a bathroom exhaust fan in apartment 3D when his phone buzzed with a message from Ruiz. No words, just a photo. The dark SUV again, this time with a second vehicle. A white cargo van parked on the side street behind the building. New addition. Cole finished the fan installation, cleaned up his tools, said goodbye to the tenant in 3D, and went downstairs to the parking garage. Ruiz was leaning against a support column with his clipboard. Van showed up this morning, Ruiz said. 2 occupants. Neither one is interested in anything else on that street. They've been there 6 hours. They're establishing coverage. Front and back, yeah. Ruiz flipped a page on his clipboard that was definitely blank. That's not surveillance anymore. That's containment prep. Cole said nothing. He understood exactly what that meant. You don't establish multi-vehicle coverage around a residential building because you're gathering information. You do it because you're getting ready to move and you don't want the target walking out a back exit while you're coming in the front. Timeline? Cole said. I don't know, but the shareholders' meeting is, 5 weeks out now? 4.5. Then they're not waiting 4.5 weeks. If they're going to neutralize her before the vote, they need to do it with enough lead time that the board can reconvene. 2 weeks. Maybe 3. Cole looked at the concrete floor. He did the math in his head. Not the tactical math. He could do that in his sleep. The other math. The math of what he could reasonably do versus what the situation was going to require. I need to tell her, Cole said. Yeah. And I need to tell her everything, not just what she needs to know. All of it. Ruiz was quiet for a second. You sure about that? She needs to make a real decision about her options. She can't do that with partial information. Cole. Ruiz said it carefully. What I'm asking is whether you're sure because of the tactical situation or because you want her to know you. Cole looked at him. Ruiz had the expression of a man who had known him for 15 years and was not going to pretend that the conversation wasn't happening. I'm not saying it's wrong, Ruiz added. I'm saying it's both things at the same time, and you should know that before you walk up there. Cole picked up his toolbox. I know, he said. He found her at her kitchen table, laptop open, phone pressed between her shoulder and ear, one hand writing notes on a legal pad. She held up a finger when she saw him, not dismissively, just the gesture of someone juggling 3 things asking for 30 seconds. He sat down across from her. She wrapped up the call in under a minute, said 2 firm things to whoever was on the other end, and put the phone on the table. She looked at his face, and whatever she saw there made her close the laptop. Tell me, she said. He told her. The van. The coverage pattern. Ruiz's assessment of the timeline. What 2-vehicle containment prep meant, and what it didn't mean, and what it was definitely building toward. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, her pen lying still on the legal pad. They're going to try to take me before the vote, she said. Not a question, just processing out loud. That's the most likely read, yes. What does take me mean in this context? It means remove you from the situation in a way that can be explained or concealed. Make it look like you left voluntarily, or like something happened that had nothing to do with Valen. Get you somewhere they control until the board reconvenes and the seat passes to someone willing to vote his way. Or something more permanent. He said it evenly because that was the only way to say it. I don't think that's their first preference. Billionaires disappearing before contested board votes attract federal attention. But if they panic or if the timeline gets disrupted, yes. She put her hand flat on the legal pad. Her hand was steady. I understand. You need to make some decisions, real ones. You can go somewhere they can't establish coverage. I can get you to someone who can arrange that. It means leaving the city, which you said you didn't want to do, but I'm not leaving. Her voice was quiet and completely certain. If I leave, he wins without having to do anything. The board reads it as me conceding. I've spent 12 years building that company. I'm not handing it to him because I'm afraid. Victoria. I'm not. She looked at him directly. I'm afraid, but that's not the same as leaving. He held her gaze. Whatever he'd been about to say didn't come. Can you keep me safe from here? She asked. Honestly, not reassurance, honestly. Cole thought about the building, the entrances, the camera positions. Ruiz on the exterior, his own training, which he had not entirely abandoned regardless of what he'd told himself about the life he'd built. He thought about what Crossline Consulting sent when they moved, because he knew the firm by more than name. He'd crossed their work twice in circumstances he didn't talk about. Honestly, he said, I can complicate things significantly. I can make the window much harder and the cost much higher. But I can't guarantee anything with two of me and no official backup. She nodded slowly. I need to call someone, she said. An attorney I trust. I need to file everything I have on the audit concerns with the SEC tonight. Tonight, not tomorrow. So it's time-stamped and in federal hands before anything happens. If they move on me after that, they're not just looking at a kidnapping. They're looking at obstruction of an active federal filing. Cole stared at her. That's a layer, she said. I know it's not a wall. I know it doesn't stop anything physically, but it changes the math on what happens afterward, which changes the risk calculus for whoever Valen hired. She was already reaching for her phone. Cole sat back and watched her do something he had seen very few people do. Take a genuine threat with a real timeline, process it completely, and immediately pivot to the most intelligent, available response rather than the most emotionally satisfying one. She wasn't frozen. She wasn't falling apart. She was working. He thought of something Ruiz had said to him years ago in a different context entirely. You can teach people tactics. You can't teach them how to think when it counts. Make the call, Cole said. She was already dialing. He pulled out his phone and texted Ruiz. She's staying. We need a plan. Tonight. Ruiz replied in under a minute. Figured, already thinking. Come down when she's settled. Cole sat in Victoria's kitchen while she talked to her attorney, her voice precise and quick, laying out the documentation she needed filed and the timeline for doing it. Emma was across the hall, asleep, unaware. The coffee maker on the counter was still warm from earlier. The city outside did what cities do, kept moving, indifferent, full of people going about their evenings without any idea what was being decided in a kitchen on the fourth floor of a building most of them had never noticed. After the call ended, Victoria sat for a long moment. The legal pad was full of notes now, the handwriting tighter and more compressed toward the bottom, the way people's handwriting gets when their mind is moving faster than the pen. Hey, Cole said. She looked up. You're doing the right thing, he said. Not as comfort, as a fact. She let out a breath that had been held a long time. Tell me that again in 5 weeks. Yeah, he said. I will. It wasn't a promise exactly, but it was close enough that neither of them pointed out the difference. Outside, the dark SUV was still on the street. The white van was still in the alley. The city kept going. The coffee maker cooled. And in apartment 4A across the hall, a 7-year-old girl slept with absolute faith that her father was handling whatever needed handling, which was, Cole thought, the heaviest kind of trust a person could carry, and also somehow the thing that made it possible to carry everything else. The plan Cole and Ruiz built that night was not elegant. Elegant plans were for people with resources and lead time and teams that had trained together. What they had was 2 men, 1 building, and a window of maybe 10 days before Crossline decided the conditions were right. They worked with what they had. Ruiz established a rotation, himself on the exterior during the hours most likely for movement, which based on Crossline's known operational patterns meant late evening through early morning. Cole covered the building's interior, which he knew better than anyone. They mapped every camera the building had, identified the 3 blind spots, and Cole quietly repositioned 2 of the maintenance cameras in the parking garage to cover angles that the existing system missed. He logged the changes as routine maintenance adjustments, which they technically were. He also had a conversation with Mrs. Petrakis on the 3rd floor, who he had learned over 3 years saw everything that happened in the building's common areas and remembered it with the precision of a woman who had nothing better to do and was not ashamed of that. He told her he was doing a security review for the building and asked her to text him if she noticed anything that seemed off. A stranger in the hallway, a door propped open, anything that felt wrong. She agreed with the seriousness of a woman who had been waiting her whole life for someone to formally acknowledge her observational skills. He did not tell Victoria about Mrs. Petrakis. He did tell Victoria about the modified camera positions, the rotation schedule, and the fact that Ruiz was carrying a weapon, because she was a person who made better decisions with complete information, and he had learned that about her quickly. She had taken all of it without flinching, which he was no longer surprised by. What he hadn't expected was what she said after. I need to tell you something, she said. They were at her kitchen table again, late, Emma long since retrieved and put to bed across the hall. The legal pad was closed. The laptop was closed. She was sitting with both hands around a glass of water, not coffee this time, It was past midnight and she'd apparently hit her limit. About why I really voted down the merger. Cole waited. I told you about the audits, the procurement relationships. All of that is true. She looked at the glass. What I didn't tell you is that 2 weeks before the board vote, Valen came to my office, privately, offered me a deal. He said if I supported the merger publicly and quietly sold him 10% of my personal stake at below market value, he would make sure I retained my board seat regardless of how the restructuring went. Cole was quiet. He wanted the company, she said. The whole thing. He knew the merger would dilute my position enough that with the 10% transfer, he'd have controlling interest within 18 months. He was asking me to help him take it from me while I smiled at the cameras. She paused. I told him no. I walked out of the office and went straight to my attorney and had everything documented that afternoon. Why didn't you tell the board that? Because he never put anything in writing. It was a verbal offer in a room with no witnesses. She looked up. If I'd brought that to the board, he would have denied it. I would have looked like I was making up reasons to block him, so I used what I could prove instead. The audits. The audits, she exhaled. I won the vote, but I knew it wasn't over. People like Valen don't lose a power play and walk away. They just change the method. Cole turned his cup. Why are you telling me this now? She met his eyes. Because you've been putting yourself between me and something you don't fully understand the size of. And you deserve to understand the size of it. He held her gaze for a moment. Valen isn't going to stop at the shareholders' meeting, he said. No. Even if I win the vote, even if he loses the seat, he'll look for another way. This isn't about the company anymore. I embarrassed him. I documented the attempted bribery and put it in front of attorneys. Men like him don't absorb that and move on. So the SEC filing tonight protects me legally, creates a record, makes anything that happens to me before the vote very difficult to explain away. She said it steadily. But it doesn't make him go away. It just makes him more expensive to deal with. Cole was quiet for a long moment. Outside, distant traffic moved through the city's late hours. The refrigerator hummed. It was the kind of silence that had weight to it. Victoria, I know what you're going to say. I don't think you do. She waited. I'm not going anywhere, he said. I just needed to hear you say it out loud so I know exactly what we're dealing with. That's all. Something moved across her face. Not quite relief, something more complicated than that. Like a person who has been carrying a weight alone for so long that when someone else picks up an end, they don't trust it immediately. They just feel the change in pressure and wait to see if it holds. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, he said. They sat for a while longer without talking. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was the specific kind of quiet that exists between people who have just agreed to something larger than what either of them said out loud. Emma figured out something was wrong on a Thursday morning. She was eating toast at the kitchen table, and Cole was standing at the window in a way he didn't usually stand, still, positioned, watching the street below. And she watched him for a full minute before she said anything. Is Miss Victoria in trouble? He turned around. Emma was 7. She had learned to read him before she could read books. There are some people who want to cause problems for her at work, he said, which was true as far as it went. Emma ate her toast. Are you going to stop them? I'm working on it. Are you going to be okay? The question landed the way Emma's questions always landed, straight and undeflected, aimed at the exact thing he hadn't decided how to address. He crouched down to her level the way he did when he wanted her to know he was answering for real. I'm going to be very careful, he said, and I'm going to have help. Is it the man with the clipboard? Cole paused. You saw him. In the parking garage, he smiled at me. He has nice eyes, but he looks like he's always thinking about something serious. She took another bite of toast. I didn't say anything because you didn't introduce him. Cole made a mental note to tell Ruiz to be less visible. He also made a mental note that his 7-year-old daughter had better situational awareness than several adults he'd served with. His name is Marcus, Cole said. He's an old friend. He's helping me. Emma nodded, accepting this with the easy trust she extended to people Cole vouched for. Can I still go to Miss Victoria's after school? Not for a few days. I need you to come straight home. She didn't argue. She looked at him with Lauren's eyes and said, Okay, Dad. in the particular tone that meant she understood more than he'd told her and was choosing not to push it. He kissed the top of her head and got her backpack ready and walked her downstairs, and watched her go through the front entrance with the carpool and stood on the steps for a moment after the car pulled away. The white van was still in the alley. He didn't look at it. He went back inside. The call came from Ruiz at 11:47 on a Friday night. Cole was awake. He'd been sleeping in 3-hour increments for the past week, an old field habit that came back without effort once the situation called for it. He picked up on the first ring. "They moved one of the vehicles," Ruiz said. His voice was the flat information-only register he used when things were in motion. "The SUV relocated to the north side of the building. The van is still south. They're splitting coverage." "That's a repositioning pattern. They're running a final assessment before they commit." "That's how I read it. You have a company event tomorrow?" Cole thought fast. Victoria had mentioned it twice, a small stakeholder briefing she couldn't cancel without sending exactly the wrong signal. 12 people, a hotel conference room 6 blocks away, a 90-minute window in the middle of the day. She'd been quietly dreading the exposure. "Yes," he said. "Then tomorrow's the window. Public space, predictable route, and she's separated from the building where they know you're a problem." Ruiz paused. "Cole, these people are going to have at least 4, maybe 6 on the ground. We can't run this with 2. "I know. So what are we doing?" Cole was already thinking through the building. The exits. The hotel's layout, which he had walked 3 days ago under the pretext of asking about a maintenance contract. The route between the 2 points. The variables. "I need you to make a call," Cole said. "Tanner, if he's reachable. And if Tanner can get Dworsky, get Dworsky." Ruiz was quiet for a second. "You're pulling the old network." "Unofficially, day work, no contracts, I'll cover expenses personally, just bodies I trust in positions I assign. Tanner still owes you about 6 favors. Tell him I'm calling one. Dworsky's in Baltimore. Baltimore's 3 hours. Call him tonight." Ruiz hung up. Cole sat in the dark apartment for a moment. Down the hall, Emma's room was quiet. Across the building wall, 4B was dark. He thought about Victoria sitting at that table, the legal pad full of notes, her voice on the phone with her attorney at midnight filing documents that were her best available move in a situation where every available move had a cost. He got up and made coffee and started planning in his head with the focused clarity that came when the situation reduced itself to its essentials. Not a web of complications, not a set of feelings he hadn't sorted through yet, just a problem with a timeline and a set of assets and a list of things that needed to not happen. He was good at this. He hated that he was still good at it. He told Victoria at 7 in the morning. She opened the door in the dark sweater, hair down for once, coffee already in hand. She took one look at his face and stepped back to let him in. He laid it out. The vehicle repositioning, the likely window. His call to Ruiz about Tanner and Dworsky. She listened with the legal pad in front of her, pen in hand, though she didn't write anything. He'd noticed she used the pad as a prop sometimes. Something to hold or look at when she was processing, not necessarily to write on. "You called in personal favors," she said. "Yes. For me. The situation required it." She looked at him for a moment with an expression he couldn't fully read. Then, "I'm not canceling the briefing." "I know. I'm not asking you to. I'm telling you the shape of tomorrow so you can move through it correctly." "What does correctly look like?" "Normal. You leave the building at your usual time, usual car. Tanner and Dworsky will be positioned on the route. Ruiz covers the exterior here. I go with you." "You go with me?" "Yes." "Cole, you're a maintenance supervisor." "I'm a maintenance supervisor who is going to be carrying a concealed weapon and walking with you into that hotel." She stared at him. "I still have my carry permit," he said. "It's current." She put the pen down. "Are you—" She stopped, started again. "Is this going to be enough?" He held her gaze. "I don't know. I think so. Crossline prefers clean operations. They're not going to move on you in a hotel lobby with witnesses and cameras. The exposure point is the transit, the vehicle, the street, the moment between the building and the hotel. That's where we control the variables. And if they move anyway, then we deal with it." He said it simply, not as bravado, just as the plain statement of a person who had dealt with worse and worse conditions. "But they're contractors, Victoria. They're calculating risk and reward. If the operation looks messy or costly, they pull back and wait for a better window. We just need to make tomorrow look costly. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, after the meeting's over, after the shareholders vote, after the board is restructured, after this is done, I'm going to have to do something about my operational security going forward. I can't keep living like this. That's a problem for 6 weeks from now. I know. She looked out the window. I'm very tired of having to think about all of this every day. I used to just think about the work. I know, he said. She looked back at him. Do you miss it? What you used to do? The question caught him slightly off center. I miss the clarity, he said after a moment. The way a mission has parameters. You know the objective. You know the constraints. You execute. He looked at the coffee in his hand. Civilian life doesn't have that. Everything's ambiguous. The objectives keep moving. Is that why you took the maintenance job? Partly. The work is clear. Something's broken. You fix it. It's broken or it isn't. He paused. And it kept me near Emma, which was the whole point. Emma kept you here. Emma keeps me everywhere, he said. She's the reason I do pretty much everything. Victoria looked at him with something that wasn't pity and wasn't admiration, something quieter than either. The kind of look that happens when a person sees something real in another person and doesn't know what to do with the recognition. She's lucky, Victoria said. She's 7, Cole said. She doesn't know about luck yet. She just knows what's there. The next morning moved the way mornings did before something happened. Too normal, slightly too slow, with the quality of ordinary time that you only notice is precious when you're about to spend some of it. Cole walked Emma to the carpool himself, which he didn't always do. Crouched down, fixed the collar of her jacket, looked her in the face. Be good today, he said. I'm always good. Be extra good today. Emma studied him. Is today the day? He hadn't told her. He'd kept it from her the same way he'd always kept the operational specifics from himself during the waiting hours. Stay in the moment. Don't run scenarios you can't control. But she had his instincts, this child. Or maybe just her own. Just be extra good, he said. Stay with your teacher. Don't go anywhere by yourself. She nodded. She hugged him tight around the neck, the way she did when she meant it, and not just as a formality, and then she climbed into the carpool vehicle and didn't look back, because looking back wasn't Emma's way. He stood on the front step and watched the car until it turned the corner. Then he went upstairs and put on a jacket that concealed what it needed to conceal and knocked on Victoria's door. Mum. The briefing was on the 2nd floor of the Meridian Hotel. Cole had walked the route the day before, timed it, noted the camera positions on the street and in the hotel lobby, identified the 2 points of maximum exposure. The first was the 30 feet between Birchwood Commons' front entrance and the car. The second was the hotel's side entrance, which Victoria preferred because it avoided the main lobby and the journalists who occasionally waited there for anyone interesting. It was the side entrance that worried him. Tanner was a broad-shouldered man who looked like he sold insurance and had, at various points in his career, done things that would make an insurance adjuster's hair turn white. He was positioned at the coffee shop on the corner between the building and the hotel, reading an actual newspaper, which Cole had told him he didn't need to do, but which Tanner apparently felt completed the look. Dworsky was 3 blocks north of the hotel, watching the vehicle approaches. Ruiz had the building's exterior. Victoria came out of 4B at 9:40, dressed differently than Cole had ever seen her. Dark jacket, dark slacks, the specific kind of professional armor that powerful women wore when they needed rooms to take them seriously from the first second. Her hair was up. She had a briefcase that she hadn't needed in the apartment building, but that now made her look like what she actually was. She looked at Cole in his jacket. How bad is it? She said quietly. It's manageable, he said. Stay at my left. They went down in the elevator, which Cole had confirmed was working correctly at 6 in the morning, just to eliminate one variable. The lobby was quiet. Cole did a sweep of the street through the glass before they went through the door. The 30 feet to the car passed without incident. The driver was a man Ruiz had arranged, someone he vouched for, not a regular car service, a former transport specialist who drove like he was always aware of all the mirrors at once. He pulled out into traffic, and Cole sat in the front passenger seat and kept his eyes on the cars around them with the patient, untiring attention of a man who had spent years learning that threat is almost always announced before it arrives, if you know what to look for. Nothing announced itself. The hotel's side entrance was a narrow service corridor off an alley. Victoria had used it twice before for other events, knew the route, moved through it with the ease of familiarity. Cole was 4 feet behind her. In the corridor, gray walls, fluorescent lights, the specific institutional quiet of a hotel's back areas, a door opened. A man came through it moving too quickly. Not hotel staff. Wrong shoes, wrong posture, the particular forward-weighted way a person moves when they're executing a task rather than walking somewhere. He had his eyes on Victoria and his right hand already coming up. Cole moved before he was conscious of deciding to. Not dramatically. Not the way it looked in movies, with preparation and momentum in perfect form. Just the sharp, economic motion of a body that remembered exactly what it was doing, crossing the distance in about 2 seconds, controlling the arm before the hand completed its reach, using the wall because the wall was right there. The man went down hard and stayed down. Cole's knee was already on his back, one hand pinning the wrist. In the man's hand was a syringe. Victoria had pressed herself against the opposite wall. She was breathing fast, but she hadn't made a sound. "Don't move," Cole said to the man on the floor, completely level. Then to Victoria. "Are you hurt?" "No." Her voice was shaking slightly but controlled. "No, I'm fine." Cole looked at the syringe. Chemical incapacitation. Clean. Deniable. Exactly what you used when you needed someone unconscious and needed it, explained as a medical episode later. He pulled out his phone and called Ruiz. "We had contact inside the hotel. I need you on the south side now. Tell Tanner the alley entrance." Then he called the number Victoria's attorney had given him 3 days ago. A federal investigator who had been quietly briefed on the SEC filing and the potential threat. He had hoped not to use it. He used it. The man on the floor had not moved. Victoria was looking at Cole with an expression he had never seen on her before. Not fear exactly, though fear was part of it. Something more total. The look of a person who has understood something completely for the first time, something they'd partially known, but not let themselves fully see. "Are you okay?" she said. He almost said yes automatically. Instead he checked. Hand steady, pulse elevated but controlled. The particular functional calm of someone running on training rather than feeling. "Yeah," he said. "I'm okay." She stopped. "You moved so fast." "Force of habit," he said. She looked at the man on the floor, at Cole, at the syringe, back at Cole. "Who are you?" she said, and it was the same question she'd asked him weeks ago in her apartment, but it meant something completely different now. "Same person I was this morning," he said. "We need to get you into that briefing room." "Cole?" "Victoria." He looked at her directly. "The briefing, right now. You walk in there and you do what you came here to do. That's how you win this. Not out here in a hotel corridor." She looked at him for a long, still moment. Then she straightened her jacket, picked up the briefcase she'd dropped against the wall, and walked toward the stairs. He followed. The briefing lasted 90 minutes. Cole stood near the back of the room and watched the exits. He watched Victoria present to 12 stakeholders with clean slides and a clear argument and a composure that he found genuinely remarkable given that 20 minutes earlier she had almost been chemically incapacitated in a hotel corridor. She didn't shake. She didn't rush. She answered questions with precision. One of the stakeholders pushed back hard on her position regarding the board restructuring, and she listened to the entire objection and then dismantled it systematically, politely, in a way that left the man with nowhere to go. Cole stood near the back wall and thought that he understood now, fully, what Valen had been afraid of. Not her money. Not her seat on the board. Her. When the briefing ended and the room was clearing, she came to him near the door. The composure was still there, but underneath it he could see what it was costing her. "The man in the corridor," she said quietly. "The federal contact. They have him. He's talking. That's what Ruiz says." "Is it enough?" "It's a direct operational link to whoever hired Crossline. Whether it's enough to get to Valen depends on what the man says." He paused. "But they have him. And he had the syringe, and the SEC filing is already time-stamped. The picture is getting clearer." She nodded. She was quiet for a moment, standing in the emptying conference room with the afternoon light coming through the blinds and the sound of the hotel hallway outside. "In the corridor," she said, "when you—" She stopped, started again. You didn't hesitate. No. That's not something you learn in maintenance work. No, he said. It isn't. She looked at him. Not the way she'd looked at him before. Not with wariness or calculation or even the thoughtful attention she gave most things. Something more direct and more frightened than any of those. I don't... She stopped again, pressed her lips together, tried once more. I don't know how to say this correctly. You don't have to say it correctly. She looked at him, and for the first time since he had known her, she looked like a person who did not have a prepared response available. I think I would be very bad at losing you, she said. That's the most honest thing I can tell you right now. Cole held her gaze. He should have said something measured, something that acknowledged the situation and the stress and the adrenaline and all the reasonable explanations for saying things you didn't plan to say. He had a whole catalog of reasonable responses. Instead, he said, I'm not planning on going anywhere. You can't promise that. No, he said, but I can tell you what I'm planning. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she did something he hadn't expected. She closed the distance between them and put her forehead briefly against his shoulder, just for a second, the way a person does when they've run out of composure and need to put it down somewhere for a moment. Her hand came up to his arm, not gripping it, just resting there. Then she straightened up. Put the composure back on, picked up the briefcase. She said. Yeah, he said. But neither of them moved quite yet. Outside the window, the city went about its business. 3 blocks away, Tanner was folding his newspaper. Ruiz was already on the phone with the federal contact, pulling the thread that led from a man with a syringe in a hotel corridor back through Crossline Consulting to the name they already knew but needed documented. The thread was pulling. The vote was 4 weeks out. And in a hotel conference room, 2 people who had come into each other's lives through a broken elevator and a 7-year-old's unerring instinct about loneliness stood a foot apart in the afternoon light, not saying the things they were saying anyway. Cole held the door open. Victoria walked through it. He followed, as he had been doing, as he intended to keep doing, with the specific and uncomplicated certainty of a man who had finally found something worth being careful for. The man from the hotel corridor gave them a name. Not Valen's name directly. The insulation between a man like Valen and the people he hired was the whole point of the insulation. But the Crossline operative, whose name turned out to be Gary Fitch, had been communicating through a logistics coordinator at a company called Meridian Asset Group, which was incorporated in Delaware and had a registered agent address that was a mail forwarding service in Wilmington. The federal investigator, whose name was Sandra Okafor, and who had the particular quality of stillness that very good investigators share with very good soldiers, told Victoria and Cole this in a conference room at the federal building downtown 2 days after the hotel incident. Fitch had been cooperative, Okafor said, in the way that people become cooperative when they're looking at serious federal charges and their employer has already cut communication with them. Crossline had gone dark the moment Fitch was detained. No contact, no legal support, no acknowledgement. He'd been left out in the cold by people who'd paid him to be there. He's giving us the communication chain, Okafor said. That takes time to trace. What we have immediately is enough to establish conspiracy to commit assault, possibly kidnapping, depending on how the DA wants to characterize the syringe. What we don't have yet is a direct documented link to whoever contracted Crossline in the first place. Meridian Asset Group, Victoria said, which has 7 registered officers and no public-facing operations. We're working through the corporate structure. Okafor looked at her across the table. Ms. Ashcroft, I want to be direct with you. The legal process is going to take longer than your shareholders' meeting. What we can do immediately is make Crossline's continued operation on this contract functionally impossible. We can have 2 agents on you starting today. I have coverage, Victoria said. Okafor glanced at Cole. Cole said nothing. The coverage you have, Okafor said carefully, has been effective. But federal protection is different in kind, not just degree. I understand that, Victoria said. I'm not refusing. I'm saying I want the people I have to stay in place as well. Okafor looked at Cole again. This time she held the look a beat longer. You have a background, she said. It wasn't a question. I did, Cole said. Navy. Yes. She nodded once with the acknowledgement of someone who doesn't need more detail to understand the relevant fact. Fine. We'll coordinate positions with your people. I'll need contact information. Cole gave her Ruiz's number. Not Tanner or Dworsky. They were already gone, back to their lives, the favor used and repaid. Ruiz was the one staying. On the way back to the car, Victoria walked beside Cole in the cold afternoon air and didn't say much for half a block. Then, "She knew what you were the second she saw you. Okafor's good at her job. She didn't ask you anything about it. Didn't need to. She got what she needed." He glanced over. "You okay?" "I'm processing." She pulled her jacket tighter, not from cold, but from the particular reflex of someone recalibrating. "There are going to be federal agents in my building. 2 of them, probably in a car outside." "That's—" She stopped. 3 weeks ago, I was trying to be invisible. Now I have federal agents and a former Navy SEAL and a man with a clipboard watching my building. And Mrs. Petrakis on the 3rd floor. Victoria looked at him. "What?" "She's been texting me reports every day. Very thorough. Yesterday she noted that a delivery driver was in the building for 11 minutes longer than a delivery should take. She was right, incidentally. He was lost, but she was right to flag it." Victoria stared at him for a moment. Then something broke in her expression. Not breaking down, just the specific crack that appears in people who have been holding very hard for very long, when something unexpectedly small strikes them as funny. She laughed. An actual laugh. The same one he'd heard in the coffee shop, unmanaged and real. "You recruited Mrs. Petrakis," she said. "She was already operating. I just gave her a reporting structure." Victoria shook her head, still smiling, and it was the first smile he had seen from her that didn't come with any of the usual caution behind it. Just a smile. Just her face doing what it did when she wasn't managing it. Cole looked away, at the street. I was smiling too, and he didn't particularly want to examine that. The 4 weeks between the hotel and the shareholders' meeting did not pass cleanly or comfortably. They passed the way difficult things pass, in increments, with setbacks, with days that felt like progress, and then a call or an email that pushed the whole picture sideways. Valen's attorneys filed 2 motions challenging the validity of the shareholder meeting, both of which Victoria's legal team was prepared for and defeated within a week. Crossline went officially dormant. Their web presence disappeared. Their registered office stopped responding, which was the behavior of a company that had decided a contract was more trouble than the fee was worth. The federal investigation into Meridian Asset Group moved at the speed federal investigations moved, which was slower than anyone involved wanted. The 2 federal agents, whose names were Kimball and Park, were not warm people. They were professional in the way that a refrigerator is professional, reliable, consistently temperature-controlled, and not interested in conversation. They sat in a dark blue sedan outside Birchwood Commons and drank coffee from thermoses and nodded when Cole checked in with them each morning, and that was the extent of their personality, as far as he could tell. But they were there, and they were competent, and there was value in both things. Ruiz stayed. He had stopped explaining why to anyone, including himself. He moved his base of operations from the gray Honda to a second-floor apartment in the building directly across the street, which belonged to a cousin of his who worked nights and didn't ask questions. He texted Cole twice a day, brief and factual, the way he always communicated when things were active. And through all of it, life in the building continued. The furnace in the basement needed a belt replaced. A water line in apartment 1B sprang a slow leak that revealed itself in a ceiling stain in the storage room below. Cole fixed these things, which was still his job and still mattered regardless of what else was happening, because the building didn't care about corporate espionage or federal investigations or the particular complicated feelings of its maintenance supervisor. Emma adjusted to the new normal with the flexibility of a child who had been raised by a person who believed in not explaining more than necessary, but also not lying. She knew something serious was happening. She knew it involved Victoria. She knew her father was handling it. She accepted all 3 of these facts and continued going to school and doing homework and having opinions about lunch. What she also did, which Cole noticed but said nothing about, was draw pictures. She had always drawn. It was a thing she did in the evenings when the TV was off, and she was supposedly winding down, sat at the kitchen table with a pad of paper and colored pencils, and produced the kind of art that 7-year-olds produce, which is to say, fully committed and technically imprecise and emotionally legible. The picture she was drawing now, Cole noticed when he glanced over, featured 3 figures consistently. A tall man, a woman with dark hair, and a small girl with a gap in her teeth. In some of them they were at a table. In some they were outside. In one, which she had left on the table, and which Cole had stood looking at for longer than he intended, all three figures were holding hands in a line, and the background was yellow, which Emma used when she meant something was good. He had folded it carefully and put it in his jacket pocket. I was not sure what to do with that, so he did nothing with it, which was what he did with several things during those weeks. Victoria changed, incrementally, in ways that Cole wasn't sure she was aware of. The dark sweaters remained. The controlled composure remained, the professional armor she put on when the situation called for it. But in the evenings at the kitchen table, in the spaces between the legal calls and the board communications, and the ongoing work of protecting a company from a man who had decided it belonged to him, she was different. She asked Emma about her day with the focus of someone who genuinely wanted to know the answer, not just as a social gesture. She remembered the names of Emma's classmates, Diego, who had eaten the paper, a girl named Priya, who Emma considered her most reliable ally, a boy named Max, who Emma had complicated feelings about that she described at length and with great analytical detail. Victoria tracked these characters through their ongoing school-life drama with the attention she usually gave financial filings. She also started cooking more deliberately. Not performing, she wasn't the type for that. But there was a difference between making soup because she had excess ingredients and making soup because 3 people were going to eat it, and one of them had once mentioned she preferred minestrone to tomato. Cole noticed the distinction. He didn't say anything about it. One evening, about 2.5 weeks after the hotel, she was helping Emma with a reading assignment while Cole washed up after dinner, and he could hear them from the kitchen. Victoria's voice reading a passage, and Emma's voice interrupting to ask questions, and then Victoria answering with actual answers, not the simplified versions adults usually gave children. She talked to Emma like someone who thought the child could handle information, which Emma absolutely could, and which she clearly loved, because her interruptions kept coming and getting more specific, which meant she was engaged. Cole stood at the sink and listened to this for a while. He thought about Lauren. He did this sometimes, not with the sharp, destabilizing grief of the first year, but with a more settled kind of sadness, the sadness of a distance that has become familiar. He thought about what Lauren would have made of this situation. She had been a person with a strong instinct about people and a very low tolerance for anything that wasted time, including hesitation about things that were already clearly true. He thought she would have had opinions. He thought she would have told him those opinions plainly and possibly with some impatience. He dried his hands and went back to the table. The call came from Okafor 9 days before the meeting. Cole took it in the parking garage, his voice echoing slightly off the concrete. Meridian Asset Group traces to a man named Philip Corson, Okafor said. He's a financial intermediary with a history of working for parties in contested corporate situations. He's not Valen. He's a contractor, same as Crossline was, just at the financial level. But Corson's communications with Crossline are documented now, and his communications with a senior VP at Ashcroft Valen are documented as well. Not Valen directly. Not yet. But the VP's name is Raymond Chu. He's been with the company 8 years, reports directly to Valen, and he has been very active in his communications with Corson in the 6 weeks since Ms. Ashcroft filed for the shareholder meeting. We're bringing Chu in tomorrow morning. Cole leaned against a support column. Chu talks. You get Valen. That's the sequence we're hoping for. No guarantee, but Chu's a company man, not a criminal. People like that tend to reassess their loyalty when they're sitting across from a federal agent. Is Victoria safe for the next 9 days? Crossline is dormant. Corson is about to be in a room with us. The operational capacity that was pointed at her is essentially dismantled. A pause. That doesn't mean zero risk. It means manageable risk with the coverage currently in place. Understood. Cole. She used his first name, which she hadn't done before. What you did in the hotel corridor, the restraint you used. The man is unhurt. The syringe is in evidence. The chain of custody is clean. That mattered. I know. I'm saying thank you, professionally. The operation stayed usable because of how you handled it. He said nothing for a moment. How's it looking for the vote? That's outside my jurisdiction. Ask her. A brief pause. But from what I've seen of her, I'd bet on her. She hung up. Cole stood in the parking garage for a moment in the cold and the concrete echo quiet. Then he went upstairs and told Victoria what Okafor had told him and watched the tension in her shoulders shift. Not disappear, shift, downward and inward, settling into relief rather than vigilance. Chu, she said. She said the name like she was testing its weight. Ray Chu has been with us since the 3rd year. He started in analytics. You know him. I hired him. She sat with that for a moment. Valen got to him. Valen was working this for a long time. Yes. She was quiet. Then, I keep thinking about what the company would look like right now if I had just signed off on the merger, if I had taken the path of least resistance. She looked at the table. It would have looked fine from the outside for maybe 18 months, and then it would have collapsed in a federal investigation that I would have been named in, and Valen would have found a way to be standing just outside the blast radius. You knew that. I knew it, and I voted the right way, and it still cost me 8 months of this. She made a small, frustrated gesture. Not dramatic, just a hand lifted and dropped. I keep wanting there to be a lesson where the right thing doesn't cost you anything. I keep being reminded that's not how it works. No, Cole said. It isn't. She looked at him. Has it always been like that for you? Doing the right thing and paying for it anyway? He thought about that honestly. Mostly. Not always in ways I expected. Sometimes the cost comes later. He turned his cup on the table. Lauren died while I was trying to do right by 2 things at once and not doing either one well enough. I'm not saying the job killed her, but I was somewhere I'd chosen to be and she was home and then she wasn't, and I carried that for a long time. Victoria was very still. I still carry it, he said. It's not in my hands anymore. It's just part of the weight. He looked up. You do the right thing because the alternative is worse, not because it's free. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. Not a gesture she'd calculated. He could tell by the way she did it. Not smooth, slightly tentative, the hand landing and then not moving, waiting to see if it was the wrong choice. Her hand was warm and her fingers were slightly cold at the tips, the way hands got when someone had been sitting still too long. He turned his hand over. Her fingers found his and held them. Neither of them said anything. Across the hall, Emma was asleep. The building was quiet. The federal agents were in their car outside. Ruiz was across the street in his cousin's apartment, probably also awake, probably reading something on his phone with the clipboard on the table beside him, out of pure habit. Cole looked at their hands on the table. He thought about the yellow drawing in his jacket pocket. The 3 figures. The gap-toothed girl who had looked at this woman in a doorway months ago and seen something the 2 adults had spent considerable effort not seeing. I don't know how to do this, Victoria said, quietly. Not ashamed of saying it, just honest about it. It's been a long time since I let anyone... She stopped, tried again. I'm bad at it. I've been told I'm bad at it. By who? People who didn't have the patience for the version of me that takes time to trust anything. I have patience, Cole said. Occupational hazard. Something shifted in her face, the corner of her mouth, the slight ease around her eyes. You fix things for a living. You have to have patience. Also, I've raised Emma for 4 years. I have quantities of patience that probably qualify as a clinical condition. She laughed. Again, the real one, the unguarded one. Her hand stayed in his. I'm not asking for anything, Cole said. I'm just telling you I'm not one of the people who couldn't wait. She looked at him. I know, she said. I think that's what scares me most. He understood that. Being scared of the person who was safe. Because if it went wrong with them, there was no blaming it on their impatience or their shallowness or their unwillingness to stay. He understood it because he'd felt the same thing, standing outside 4B a month ago, deciding whether to knock on the door about a radiator or let it wait until morning. We'll be bad at it together, he said. Probably. Probably, she agreed. Her thumb moved against the side of his hand once, and they sat in the quiet kitchen until the coffee went cold. Raymond Chu talked. Okafor called Victoria directly this time, the morning after the interview, with the precise efficiency of a person who respected another person's time. Chu had provided documentation of communications in which Valen had explicitly directed the use of Meridian Asset Group for, quote, resolution of the Ashcroft situation prior to the scheduled vote. The phrase was legal speak for criminal intent, and the documentation had Valen's digital signature on internal communications that his own company's servers had retained. Derek Valen was arrested at his home at 6 in the morning, 4 days before the shareholders' meeting. Cole heard about it from Victoria, who had gotten the call from Okafor at 6:15. He was already awake, He was always already awake. She knocked on his door, and he opened it to find her in the dark sweater, holding her phone, and she looked, not triumphant, nothing like that. She looked like a person who has been in a fight for 8 months and has just been told the fight is over, which is not the same as feeling good. It's a specific kind of exhausted relief that has nowhere clean to land. He's arrested, she said. I know. Okafor texted Ruiz. Ruiz texted me. Of course she did. She leaned against the doorframe. It's over. The legal part is just starting, he said. I know, but this part... She gestured in a way that meant the cameras, the van, the syringe, the 8 months of looking over her shoulder. This part is over. Yeah, he said. This part is over. She exhaled, long and slow, and her shoulders dropped in a way he'd never seen them drop before, like something she'd been bracing against had simply stopped pushing. Emma appeared behind Cole in her pajamas, hair in every direction, squinting at the hallway light. What happened? The bad situation is resolved, Cole said. Emma processed this, looked at Victoria. Are you okay? Victoria looked at this child, this small, gap-toothed, completely unassuming child who had knocked on her door with leftover pasta and an opinion about dragons and had somehow become the unexpected center of something Victoria hadn't known she was missing. I'm okay, Victoria said. And then she crouched down to Emma's level, which she rarely did, and Emma looked at her with those direct, inherited eyes, and Victoria said, Thank you for being my friend. It helped, more than you know. Emma considered this with appropriate seriousness. Then she hugged Victoria around the neck, and Victoria hugged her back this time. Not the two careful pats from weeks ago, but an actual hug, both arms, like she meant it. Cole stood in the doorway and didn't say anything. The shareholders' meeting was 4 days later. Victoria had prepared for it over 3 years, really. The documentation, the relationships, the case she'd built patiently and carefully for a board that needed to understand why the company's future looked different than Valen had promised. With Valen arrested and Chu cooperating with federal prosecutors, the meeting itself was almost anticlimactic, in the way that things are anticlimactic when the hardest part turned out to be surviving long enough to get there. She won the vote, 14-3. The board restructured. 2 of Valen's remaining allies resigned within the week rather than face the governance review Victoria's team had already prepared. Cole found out the vote result the same way he found out most things now. From Victoria herself, who called him from outside the meeting venue at 2 in the afternoon, standing on a sidewalk in the cold, and said simply, 14-3. Congratulations, he said. A pause. It doesn't feel the way I thought it would. Never does. I thought I'd feel... She searched for it. I thought I'd feel like I'd won something. I mostly feel like I want to go home and sit in the kitchen and not talk to anyone except you and Emma. Cole looked at the furnace room wall he'd been inspecting when the phone rang. I'll order food, he said. Emma's been asking for noodles. Get the ones with the soup, not the dry ones. I know which ones. Okay. Another pause. I'm coming home. He stood for a moment after she hung up, in the furnace room with its smell of dust and heated metal, and recognized the word she'd used without making a thing of it. Home. He ordered the noodles. What changed after the vote changed slowly, the way real things change. Not in moments, but in accumulation. Victoria did not leave Birchwood Commons. This surprised people who knew her from before, colleagues, board members, 2 journalists who wrote brief items about the case when Valen's arrest became public, all of whom apparently assumed that a billionaire who had been living in a mid-tier apartment building under threat would return to her previous life as soon as the threat was gone. Victoria read one of the articles, handed her phone to Cole with the relevant paragraph highlighted, and said, They think I was hiding here. You were at first, he said. And then I wasn't, she said, and they can't tell the difference. She renewed her lease. She repainted the kitchen a slightly different shade, something warmer, and Cole helped her move the furniture around until it felt like a place someone actually lived, rather than a place someone was waiting to leave. She started working from home more and going to the office less, which her assistant adapted to without complaint and which Victoria said she should have done years ago. The work was the same. The board calls, the investor communications, the relentless detail of running a technology company through a period of restructuring. But she did it from the kitchen table now, with the radiator that no longer knocked in the corner and the afternoon light coming through the window. And sometimes Emma came over after school and did homework at the other end of the table, and they worked in companionable parallel, two people with very different tasks and a shared preference for quiet. Cole watched this happen over the course of weeks, from the position of a man who had learned to be patient and who understood, finally, that some things could not be fixed. They could only be built, slowly, from the right materials, by people who were willing to stay in the room while it happened. He was willing. Ruiz came by one afternoon, the clipboard under his arm, ostensibly to return a tool he'd borrowed from the building's supply room. He found Cole in the hallway outside 4A and stood for a moment with the expression he used when he was observing something he'd been expecting for a while. "How's the situation?" Ruiz said. "Resolved," Cole said. "Right." Ruiz looked at the door to 4B. The sound of Emma's voice came through it, saying something about fractions, and Victoria's voice responding with what sounded like a genuinely better explanation than the textbook had offered. "And the other situation?" Cole said nothing. Ruiz nodded, not needing him to. He handed over the tool. "She's good," he said. Not as a compliment exactly, more as a verdict, the kind Ruiz delivered about people in the same way he delivered assessments of terrain, accurate, considered, not requiring response. "Yeah," Cole said. "She is. Emma likes her. Emma loved her before either of the rest of us figured out what we were doing." Ruiz smiled. It was a small smile, the kind that didn't get much use on his face, but it was real. "That kid's something." "Yeah," Cole said. "She is." Ruiz left the same way he always left, quietly, completely unremarkable. The gray Honda pulling out of the visitor lot and disappearing into traffic, the clipboard on the seat beside him. Cole stood in the hallway. Through the door to 4B came the sound of a 7-year-old explaining why fractions were unfair, and an adult voice saying they were unfair but also unavoidable, which was a category of things worth learning to handle. Emma said that sounded like something a dad would say, and Victoria laughed and agreed and said she'd learned it from one. Cole put his key in the door to 4A. He thought about Emma's drawing, still folded in his jacket pocket, the 3 figures in the yellow light. He thought about the way Victoria's hand had felt in his, the cold fingertips and the warmth underneath. He thought about the specific weight of what he was carrying now versus what he had been carrying 4 years ago, and the difference, and what the difference cost, and also what it meant. It meant something. He knew that now. He went inside and hung up his jacket and thought about how to say it. He didn't have the words yet, but he had the kind of patience that came from fixing things for a living, the understanding that not everything needed forcing, that some things came apart correctly under gentle pressure applied in the right place at the right time, and that the mark of real skill was knowing when to wait. He was waiting. But not, he thought, for much longer. The ring had been in Cole's jacket pocket for 3 weeks before he bought it. That sentence didn't make sense to anyone who hadn't been inside his head during that period, but it was accurate. He had known he was going to buy it for 3 weeks before he actually walked into the small jewelry shop on Caldwell Street that a former tenant had mentioned once, offhandedly, as the place she'd gotten her mother's ring resized. He'd walked past it 4 times on maintenance supply runs without going in. On the 5th time he went in, stood at the case for 12 minutes, and bought a ring that was simple and not flashy and looked like something a person wore because they meant it, not because they were making a statement. He had not told Emma. He had not told Ruiz. He had particularly not told Mrs. Petrakis, who would have told everyone in the building within 48 hours with the best possible intentions. He kept it in the inside pocket of his jacket, the same pocket where he'd carried Emma's drawing for months, and he went about his days, fixing things, picking Emma up from school, eating dinner across the hall 3 or 4 nights a week, and waited for the moment that was right rather than the moment that was convenient, because those were different things, and he'd learned the difference the hard way. Victoria had settled into her life at Birchwood Commons the way a person settles into something they've stopped arguing with. The company was in a different phase now. The governance restructuring complete, 2 new board members seated, the federal case against Vallon moving through its early stages with the grinding patience of federal proceedings. She was working hard, as she always had, but the quality of the work had changed. She described it to Cole one evening as the difference between running toward something and running away from something. The motion looked the same from the outside, but the internal experience was entirely different. Vallon's trial was still months away. His attorneys had entered a not guilty plea that surprised no one and would likely change nothing, given the documentation Raymond Chu had handed to federal prosecutors. Chu himself had taken a plea arrangement, cooperation for a reduced charge, and was no longer at the company. Victoria had signed the termination paperwork without comment, which Cole had asked her about afterward, and she'd said it wasn't satisfying, which he understood. There was nothing satisfying about someone you'd hired and trusted and believed in choosing to work against you because someone else offered them an easier path. That was just a loss. And losses didn't come with tidy feelings. She was learning, she said, to stop expecting tidy feelings about things that weren't tidy. Cole said that was a significant achievement. She told him he was patronizing her. He said he wasn't. He meant it, because he had 37 years of evidence that untidy feelings were the norm and tidiness was the exception, and most people never stopped being surprised by this. She had considered that and said fair enough. This was how they talked, directly, with occasional friction, neither of them particularly interested in managing the other person's comfort at the expense of saying the real thing. Cole had been married to a woman who communicated the same way, and he had learned to value it so completely that its absence in other relationships had always felt like something missing from a recipe. With Victoria, it was simply present, in the same way it had been simply present with Lauren, and he didn't draw that comparison consciously or make it mean more than it meant. It just was what it was. Two people who didn't waste each other's time with performances. The picnic was Emma's idea. She proposed it on a Thursday morning with the confidence of someone who had already worked out all the relevant logistics in her head and was now presenting the finished plan to the people who would be executing it. The lake in Milburn Park was 30 minutes from the apartment. The Saturday forecast was clear and cold, but not unbearably so. She had already identified what they should bring, including a specific type of cracker that she considered essential and non-negotiable. Cole said it sounded good. Emma looked at him. "You're going to ask Miss Victoria, right?" "I was going to mention it to her, yes." "Today, not the day before. She likes to have time to think about things." Cole looked at his daughter over his coffee cup. "I know that. I'm just saying. I know that too." Emma went back to her breakfast with the air of someone who had done what needed doing. Cole drank his coffee and thought about the ring in his jacket pocket and the particular set of things that Saturday was becoming in his head, whether he'd intended it or not. He knocked on Victoria's door at 7:15. She was already up, already working, laptop open on the kitchen counter, phone nearby. She'd developed a habit of working the early hours before the rest of the business world fully activated, which she said was the most productive 2 hours of her day. She looked up when she saw him. "Emma wants a picnic," he said. "Saturday, Milburn Park. She has opinions about crackers." Victoria considered this. What kind of crackers? "The thin ones with the seeds." "Those are good crackers." That's what she said. Victoria looked at her laptop, then at him, with the particular expression of someone calculating whether Saturday's work could shift without consequence. He knew this look by now. The internal audit she ran before agreeing to anything that wasn't work, checking to make sure she was allowed to want the things she already wanted. "Saturday's fine," she said. "Emma will be relieved." "Emma was never worried," Victoria said. "She knew I'd say yes." Cole smiled. "Yeah," he said. She did. Saturday came in clear and cold the way it had promised. The November sky, a pale, wide blue that made everything look slightly sharper than usual. They drove to Milburn Park in Cole's truck, Emma in the back with the picnic bag she had packed herself and was guarding with an energy that suggested the crackers specifically were at risk. The park was not crowded. A few joggers, a man walking a dog that had opinions about every other thing it encountered, two elderly men playing chess at a concrete table near the path. The lake was steel gray in the morning light, geese moving along the far edge in their unhurried way. They found a table near the water and unpacked the bag. Emma had been thorough. Crackers, cheese. Cole had sliced the night before. Apples she'd cut into wedges with more confidence than precision. A thermos of hot chocolate that was mostly for her, but that she would share under specific conditions she would announce at a time of her choosing. Victoria sat on the bench across from Emma and wrapped her hands around the thermos lid Cole had poured for her and looked at the lake. She had her hair down. She was in a jacket that was practical rather than professional, worn-looking in the way things get worn when they're actually used. She looked like herself. Not the version she presented in boardrooms or to journalists or to anyone she needed to manage. Just herself, in a park, on a Saturday, in the cold. Cole watched her when she wasn't looking, the way he had been watching her for months. Not surveillance, not the trained observation habit, just the specific attention you pay to someone who has become essential to your sense of where you are. He knew the way she held a cup. He knew the way she went quiet before she said something real. He knew the exact quality of her laugh, when something caught her genuinely off guard versus the polished version she used in professional settings. And the difference between those two things was the difference between the person and the presentation. He knew her. That was the fact of it. He'd been learning her the way he learned buildings. Not all at once, but in the practical accumulation of time spent in the same spaces, noticing what worked and what didn't, what needed attention and what was fine on its own. He'd built the knowledge without planning to, and now it was just there, load-bearing, the way knowledge becomes when you've been paying honest attention long enough. Emma was eating crackers and talking about a project at school, something about ecosystems, which had led her to develop strong opinions about pond biology that she was now sharing with the geese in the distance, not because she expected them to listen, but because she had opinions, and the geese were there. Victoria watched Emma with the look she'd had since the early weeks. That quiet hunger, but different now, settled. Not hunger anymore. More like recognition. Like someone who had found a thing they didn't know they'd been looking for and was no longer surprised to want it. Cole reached into his jacket pocket. He had not planned this particular moment. Not the bench, not the lake, not the specific angle of the November light. That was the thing he'd learned in the end about the right moments. They didn't look the way you thought they would. They looked like a Saturday morning with cold hands and a thermos of hot chocolate and a 7-year-old explaining aquatic ecosystems to geese. They looked like the most ordinary version of a thing, which was the version that lasted. "Victoria," he said. She turned from watching Emma. He had the ring in his hand, not down on one knee yet, just the ring in his open palm, holding it the way you hold something you've thought about a long time and finally stopped thinking and started doing. She looked at the ring, then at him. "I've been carrying that for 3 weeks," he said. "I kept waiting for the right time, and then I kept reminding myself that I'm 37 years old, and I already know what happens when you wait too long to say the real thing." He paused. "So this is me saying the real thing." She hadn't looked away from his face. She had the expression he'd come to recognize as her most honest one. Not the composure, not the professional armor, not even the guarded warmth of the early months. Just her. Open. A little scared, completely present. "I'm not easy," he said. "I wake up at 5 in the morning, and I never fully stop watching the exits, and I have a 7-year-old who is going to interview you about your intentions before I've even asked the question, 'Dad?'" Emma's voice, from approximately 2 feet away, where she had turned completely around and was watching this with the expression of someone who has been waiting for this exact moment and is not even slightly surprised it's happening. "And I don't have money or a different career or any of the things that probably make more sense for someone in your position," Cole continued, because he'd started and he was finishing. "I have this building and Emma and the fact that I meant every single thing I said to you over the past 4 months. That's the list." Victoria looked at him. Her eyes were bright, and she was not going to cry. He knew that about her. She didn't perform emotion. She felt it internally and let it show only in the peripheral details, the stillness of her face and the way her hands had gone tight around the thermos lid. "Cole," she said. "Yeah. You're the least uncertain person I've ever met," she said. "That's not a criticism. I just need you to understand what it's like dealing with you when you're certain about something." "Is that a yes or a no?" "It's a yes." She said it simply, the way she said things she meant. No preamble, no softening, no performance. Just the word and the fact of it. He got down on one knee, because that was the shape of the thing, and held up the ring, and she held out her hand, which was shaking slightly. Not much, just enough that he noticed. And it mattered because she was not a person who shook, and it meant the feeling was real, and she was not managing it, and that was worth more to him than anything she could have said. The ring fit. Emma made a sound that was approximately the sound of someone who had gotten the outcome they predicted and wanted confirmation of their predictive accuracy. Then she launched herself off the bench and into both of them simultaneously, wrapping one arm around Cole's neck and one around Victoria's, in the specific physical logic of a child who has decided that something is final and is now installing herself into the middle of it. Victoria caught her, both arms, fully, without the careful distance of the early months. She pulled Emma into her chest and held on, and Emma let herself be held, and Cole sat back on his heels on the grass and watched the two of them and felt something that he didn't have a clean name for, not happiness exactly, which was too simple, but something that had happiness in it alongside grief and relief and the particular fullness of a life that has come back to itself after a long time away. He thought about Lauren. He let himself do it completely, without the usual redirection. He thought about what it meant to be here, in this park, with these two people, and what it meant about the 4 years between then and now, and the specific weight of the choice to keep going when keeping going was the hardest available option. He thought Lauren would have had something to say about Victoria. Probably sharp, probably accurate, probably delivered in the tone she used for people she respected. He thought she would have watched Emma climb into Victoria's arms and nodded once, the way she nodded at things she'd already known were coming. He thought she would have been glad. He didn't need that to be anything more than what it was. A thought, a feeling, a private acknowledgement of everything that had led here. It didn't need to be resolved or explained. It could just exist alongside the rest of what he was feeling, which was the way grief worked when you finally stopped fighting it. It found its place in the picture without erasing anything else. Emma lifted her head from Victoria's shoulder and looked at her with great seriousness. "So, can I call you Mom now, or do we have to wait for the wedding?" Victoria looked at Cole over Emma's head with an expression caught between laughing and something much deeper than laughing. Cole said nothing. I was curious about the answer, too. Victoria looked back at Emma. "What do you want to do?" Emma thought about this with genuine deliberation, the way she approached questions that mattered. "I think I'll try it now," she said, "and if it feels right, we'll keep it." "That's a reasonable approach," Victoria said. "Mom," Emma said, testing it, a single quiet word aimed at a person who had not expected to be called that in a park on a Saturday with cold hands and a thermos of hot chocolate. Victoria pressed her lips together. The bright look in her eyes got brighter. She nodded once. "Yeah," she said. "That works." There are things that people say about love, that it finds you when you're not looking, that it comes at the right time, that it was meant to be. Cole Mercer, who had spent his adult life in proximity to the way real things actually worked, knew that none of that was how it happened. Love did not find you. You found each other in the middle of ordinary days by paying attention and staying present and being willing to let what was real be real, rather than waiting for some version of it that looked the way you'd been told it was supposed to look. He had not been looking for Victoria when she moved into 4B. He had been doing his job and raising his daughter and learning, slowly and imperfectly, how to be a person again after the losses that had taken him apart. He had not been ready. He was still not ready in all the ways a person is ready in stories, cleaned up, healed, the difficult work completed and behind him. He was a man with a past he carried and a heart that still had scar tissue and a habit of watching exits even in restaurants with people he trusted completely. He was also a man who had chosen to show up. That was the whole of it. He had shown up for Emma every day for 4 years. And he had shown up for Victoria when the situation required it. And he had stayed in the room even when the room was difficult. Because the only thing he knew how to be was present, and the only thing he knew how to trust was the evidence of what he actually saw in front of him. What he saw in front of him was real. That was enough. Victoria, for her part, would tell you that she had not been a person who believed in the particular kind of trust that love required. She had been a person who managed risk, who identified exposure and reduced it, who had built her professional life on the premise that the only reliable thing was documented evidence, because documented evidence didn't change its story based on what it needed from you. She would tell you that a 7-year-old had broken this premise before she even had a chance to apply it. That Emma had knocked on her door and eaten her food and told her she seemed lonely with the directness of someone who had not yet learned that adults preferred their loneliness unacknowledged, and that something had come undone in her chest at that observation that had not fully come back together since. She would also tell you, and this was the part that mattered, the part worth understanding, that falling in love with Cole Mercer was not a falling at all. It was a choosing, made incrementally in the small decisions of daily life, each one reversible in theory and increasingly irreversible in fact. Letting him fix the radiator, inviting him to eat soup, telling him the real story about the merger, putting her hand on his in the kitchen at midnight, letting Emma fall asleep on her couch, saying yes in a park with cold hands, each decision small, the accumulation enormous. That was what neither of them had expected when they allowed themselves to look at it honestly. Not that love was grand or fated or defined by its dramatic moments, but that it was made of ordinary ones, dinners, bad days, arguments about nothing important, the specific weight of another person's presence in rooms you inhabit, learning what someone takes in their coffee and why that matters, the thousand small accumulations that end up, one day, being indistinguishable from your life. The wedding was small. Victoria had been clear about that from the first conversation about it. Small, private, no press, no spectacle. Cole had agreed with the speed of a man who had needed no convincing. They set a date for early spring, found a venue that was a restored farmhouse outside the city, and told fewer than 30 people. The planning happened the way things happened between two people who communicated directly and had complementary organizational skills, efficiently, without much drama, with periodic disagreements that were resolved by whoever had the stronger factual case rather than by whoever felt more strongly. This was, Cole reflected, an excellent sign for the marriage. Mrs. Petrakis cried when they told her. Not sad crying, the loud, proud, completely unself-conscious crying of a woman who had been watching two people circle each other for months and considered the outcome a personal accomplishment. She brought spanakopita, which was her response to all significant life events, and Cole accepted it with genuine gratitude because he had come to depend on it at this point. Ruiz served as Cole's best man with the quiet competence he brought to everything, dressed in an actual suit with no clipboard in sight, which Cole noted was a remarkable sacrifice. During the brief ceremony, Ruiz stood at Cole's left and did not cry. But there was a moment when Emma stood between Cole and Victoria in her pale yellow dress and reached up to take both their hands simultaneously. When Ruiz looked at the ceiling in the specific way of a person who is making sure they do not cry. The ceremony was short. The officiant was a retired judge who told them she had done 300 of these and still found something in each one that she couldn't explain, which was the closest thing to profundity that Cole would accept without flinching. They said the words. Plain words, honestly meant. Victoria's voice was steady the whole way through, which did not surprise Cole. His own voice was steady until Emma squeezed his hand from the left and he had to stop and clear his throat and start the sentence over. The farmhouse's back porch looked out over a field that in early spring was all bare ground and the first uncertain suggestion of green at the edges. Cole stood there during the small reception, a drink in his hand, watching Emma chase a farmhouse dog across the field with the commitment of someone who had decided this was the most important mission of the day. Victoria came to stand beside him. Her dress was simple and not white, ivory, or maybe champagne, some color that was not what it was supposed to be but worked exactly right. She had flowers in her hair that Emma had chosen and she had not argued about, which was its own kind of love. She stood shoulder to shoulder with him, looking out at the field. "Are you doing okay?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. "Really okay." She leaned into him slightly. The specific lean that had developed over months, the one that said, "I'm here, and I know you're here, and that's what I'm saying with my body, because I don't always have the words." He put his arm around her shoulders. "She's going to catch that dog," Victoria said. "She never gives up on anything." "She didn't give up on us." "No," Cole said. She didn't. Emma had caught this dog, or the dog had stopped running and accepted its fate, and now she was sitting in the bare field hugging it while it attempted to lick her face with considerable enthusiasm. She looked up at some point and saw them watching, and waved, big, full arm, across the whole field, and Cole waved back. Victoria waved too. And Emma grinned, the gap in her teeth visible even from that distance, and turned back to the dog. Cole looked at the field, the pale sky, the bare edges of the season. He thought about the things he knew and the things he didn't know, and the fundamental human fact that you spend your whole life trying to build something durable out of materials that were never guaranteed to last. He thought about Lauren and what she had taught him about love simply by being someone who had shown up every day for the years they had. He thought about Emma drawing 3 figures in yellow light on a piece of paper, and the particular clarity of children who have not yet learned to doubt what they can plainly see. He thought about the fact that he was 37 years old and had spent significant parts of his life being someone very difficult to know, and that the people who knew him anyway, Ruiz with his clipboard, Emma with her gap-toothed certainty, Victoria with her cold fingers and her real laugh and her willingness to put her hand on his in a quiet kitchen, were the whole of what he had built and the only thing that would matter when the accounting was done. It was enough. More than enough. It was, in fact, everything. "Cole," Victoria said. "Yeah." "I'm glad Emma knocked on my door." He looked at her. She was looking at the field, at Emma, at the dog. Her face was warm and complicated and real, the way her face was when she wasn't managing it. "Hey, with the pasta," she added, "that first time." The pasta was a very good strategic opening. It was a 7-year-old with leftovers and an agenda. "Emma's agendas tend to work out," he said. Victoria turned to look at him. "Yeah," she said, "they do." He kissed her, there on the porch, with the field in front of them and the party behind them, and Emma, somewhere out there winning the loyalty of a farmhouse dog, and it was not the kind of kiss that looked like anything in particular from the outside. Just two people, briefly, saying what they meant. When they separated, Victoria rested her forehead against the side of his face for a moment. He felt her breathe. Then she straightened and looked back at the field, and he looked back at the field, and they stood there together in the easy, load-bearing quiet of two people who have stopped performing and started inhabiting, which was the whole of what they had ever wanted and the only thing that was worth the work. Emma came running back across the field without the dog, which had apparently been recalled by the farmhouse owner, a situation Emma considered unjust but had accepted as final. She arrived at the porch steps slightly out of breath, and her hair escaped from its arrangement and mud on the hem of her yellow dress. And she looked up at both of them with the expression she'd worn since the beginning, since the hallway, since the pasta, since every small ordinary moment that had led to this one. "Okay," she said, in the voice she used when she was ready to proceed to the next item. "What are we doing now?" Cole and Victoria looked at each other. "Anything we want," Cole said. Emma considered this, nodded, accepted it as a sufficient answer to a reasonable question. Then she climbed the porch steps and took both their hands, one on each side, the way she had stood during the ceremony, the way she had stood in the yellow drawing months ago. A small person between two people who had found their way to each other through the long way around, who had been broken separately and were whole together in the imperfect, provisional, completely sufficient way that real things are whole. They went inside. The door closed behind them. Outside, the field was still. The early spring light stayed for another hour, long and pale and quiet, the way good things stay. Not forever, but long enough to matter, which was all anything ever needed to be.